The number of Latinos in the United States
I'm always in touch with my Hispanic side.
who look like this
I'm Seiko Guadalupe Lara. Oh my god.
and speak like this
Yo mismo te estoy dando la luz verde a ti.
is growing.
I say I'm Mexican.
The AAPI Latino population in the US has more than doubled since 2000.
Vamos a comer.
Why has the number of Asian American and Pacific Islander Latinos increased so much? Which states have the biggest populations?
And what does this group tell us about the changing face of the country?
Lunita bella, dime que ella volverá. Bellaca y belladita, suelta y soltera.
This story is about the hyphen between AAPI and Latino culture.
For the last 2 decades, the AAPI Latino population in the United States has actually been growing at a faster rate than the overall Latino population.
That's according to an analysis of population data compiled by the USA Latino Policy and Politics Institute and the AAPI Civic Engagement Fund released in 2024.
AAPI Latinos are on the younger side, so they're about half, a little less than half, is under the age of 18.
Kevin Kandambi is one of the authors of the data brief.
AAPI Latinos are entering this conversation where we are challenging what it means to be Latino.
AAPI Latinos are a small but growing faction of the Latino population.
In 2000, they accounted for less than 1% of all Latinos in the US. In 2022, they accounted for 1.4%.
According to the report, there are multiple ways someone can identify as AAPI Latino, but there are 2 ways that dominate the growth.
There are people who are AAPI Latinos through double or secondary migration, and people who have one AAPI parent and one Latino parent. People like California-based content creator Aileen Park fall into the first category.
A lot of people don't know this. Vos naciste en Argentina.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know this, but I was actually born in Argentina and I lived in Argentina until I was 15 years old.
And Park's mom was born and raised in South Korea before moving to Argentina.
In 1989, toda la familia nos mudamos de Corea del Sur a Argentina.
Chinito, a chef and musician who grew up in New York, also falls into this first category.
My dad born and raised in the Dominican Republic, but by blood he's fully Japanese. My grandma is Japanese.
But he also falls into the second category because he has an AAPI parent and a Latino parent.
His dad is Japanese Dominican, and his mom was born in the Dominican Republic.
And I know what you're thinking. His name is Chinito, but no, he's not Chinese.
My name is Chinito. I was born in Japan, this, that. And then a lot of comments is like, yo, stop calling him Chinito. He's not Chinito, this and that. Pero yo mismo te estoy dando la luz verde a ti to call me Chinito, you feel me? Like, because I understand that a lot of Asians don't like it because it's like, oh, it's saying that all Asians are Chinese. But to defend, los Latinos is more of a form of encariño, tú sabes.
The states with the most AAPI Latinos are Florida, New York, Hawaii, Texas, and California, with the latter taking the #1 spot by a long shot.
In fact, in California, they're so common, some of them have even held political office.
Alberto Torrico, who is Bolivian and Japanese, was a California State Assembly member. Kirina Orozco is a Mexican-Filipina City Council member in West Sacramento. Leti Lopez Viado, who is Mexican and Filipina as well, became the first Asian Latina mayor of West Covina in 2020.
And it was actually something that Lopez Viado said in an interview 4 years ago about West Covina that gave me an idea.
We actually have a high population of Filipino and Mexican, that they comprise of the majority in our city. The Hispanics have the highest population in our city, and then we have a mixture of the Asians, which the Pacific Islanders consist. So they're probably like second.
So given those strong population numbers, I figured there was a good chance I could run into Mexicanos or Mexican Filipinos in West Covina who could tell me what it's like to grow up in between 2 very different cultures.
So I decided to come to West Covina, California, and I stopped at this mall for coffee and a quick bite. And as I was pulling up, I saw this like big festival by the mall in the plaza, and it just so happens to be a Japanese cherry blossom festival. So I'm gonna see if I can find AAPI Latinos there.
Before telling you what I found though, I wanted to take a moment to tell you something.
My name is Fernando Hurtado, and I'm a journalist with more than 8 years of experience. I recently left my job at NBC and Telemundo to launch this channel right here, In The Hyphen, where I'm telling deeply researched, visually rich stories about US Latinos. And I need your help. Please subscribe and hit that little bell button so you don't miss the next video. The best part is that helping me is totally free to you. But if you do want to go a step further, you can become a patron. I'm linking my Patreon link here, where you can help fund my journalism. You actually get early access to videos there, the ability to contribute to stories, and I also do a monthly podcast where I peel back the curtain on the business side of In The Hyphen, where I talk numbers, including money. The link to that is in my bio. Thank you so much for watching and for your support. All right, now back to the video.
So back at this West Covina mall, I actually couldn't find a single Mexipino, but I could find
Half Japanese, half Mexican. My dad's Mexican, my mom was Japanese.
My dad is Mexican. His family immigrated here from Mexico. And then my mom, she's Japanese and Chinese.
Then I met Tyla, whose dad is Mexican and mom is Cambodian.
So Tyler, when people ask you, oh, what are you? Where are you from? What do you say?
I say I'm Mexican.
I like that. And what do people say when you say Mexican? Are they like, oh, I know a bunch of Mexicans? Are they like, what, Mexican?
Yeah, they're like confused.
Everyone I spoke to seemed to share similar struggles with how others perceive their AAPI Latino identity.
Growing up, when you're younger, you get teased a little bit. You hang out with the Mexicans, they say this, you hang out with the Asians, you're this, so.
I've literally gotten people be like, no, you're like Filipino. Like that's not, like you can't be like Mexican and Asian at the same time. Like you're just Filipino, because a lot of people think that like Filipino people are like the Mexicans of like Asians or whatever.
And then there are the stereotypes associated with each of their nationalities.
A lot of people would think I was like a Mexican, like Chino kid or whatever. I would get kind of stereotyped as like, oh wow, like you must be like really smart, or you must come from like a really well-off family and things like that.
I was curious to see if there were any similarities between Seiko's Mexican, Japanese, and Chinese sides of the family.
They intersect so, oh my God, no, it's so funny because they're so, I want to say like family oriented. Like I feel like both sides, like both Mexican and Asian sides, like really appreciate and value like family, if that makes sense, and like connections and like kind of like working for your family and working towards like your family or like whatever, and giving back to your family, giving back to your grandparents.
So why are so many AAPI Latinos in California? And why is the population growing in the United States? To answer that, we first have to understand how so many Asian migrants ended up in Latin America. There were a string of events that spurred substantial immigration. Here are just 4 of them.
In the 1500s, New Spain, now modern-day Mexico, and Peru established trade routes with China, India, and Japan. These trade routes ran through the Philippines for more than 200 years. This was during the time the Philippines was colonized by Spain. The trade route, worked by Filipino slaves, brought many Filipinos to what is now Mexico, namely Acapulco, Guerrero. In the 1800s, following a ban on the African slave trade, European colonies in the Americas needed to find cheap or free labor elsewhere. That's how the coolie trade emerged, where Indian and Chinese people were sent to plantations in Cuba and Peru as indentured servants. Then there were the 1900s, when Korea was slowly falling under the pressure of the Japanese Empire's repeated invasions. About 1,000 Koreans decided to migrate to Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, lured by the promise of good jobs and safety.
Instead, they were bound to 4 years of indentured servitude on a plantation. And when that contract was up, they actually could not return to Korea, as the Japanese Empire had taken over the country. So they decided to stay and establish roots in Mexico instead.
And then about 50 years later, there was a small wave of Japanese immigrants to Latin America after World War II. That wave included Chinito's family.
So during World War II, you know, the bomb and all that, Japan was looking crazy.
Chinito is talking about the defeat of Japan in World War II. Experiencing severe social and economic turmoil, Japan looked to resettle many of its residents. In the 1950s, one of the countries that agreed to take in Japanese migrants was the Dominican Republic, which at the time was under President Rafael Trujillo's dictatorship.
He got like 300 families, de Japón, to go over there to work on the agriculture and this and that. My grandparents were a few of those, so they was there for a while. They had my dad alongside his brothers and sisters was born over there.
So that's how a wave of Asian migrants, namely Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and Filipinos, ended up in Latin America. How did Asian Latinos end up in the United States?
The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 opened up immigration to the United States from Asia. The act got rid of national origin quotas that existed under the Johnson-Reed Act of 1924, which severely limited the number of immigrants allowed entry to the United States following World War I.
Those 1924 quotas favored North and Western European countries and completely shut out parts of Asia. The 1965 Act undid that. That changed the face of the United States.
From 1965 to 2015, the foreign-born population increased from 9.6 million to 45 million people.
Okay, so that's why we saw an influx of Asian and Latin American migrants, respectively, in the United States. Why does California have the biggest population of AAPI Latinos?
The history of, labor migration, and more broadly, if we look at the two groups separately, right? So AAPI demographic, immigrant demographic here has always been really large in California, and also for the Latino demographic too, specifically the Mexican demographic. And so
that's how you get places like Yuba City, just north of Sacramento, deemed the birthplace of Punjabi Mexican culture. In the 1900s, Punjabi men immigrated from what is now India and Pakistan to California as agricultural workers.
Anti-Asian migration policies meant these workers could not bring their families with them. Now, at the same time, California was seeing a wave of Mexican migrants, driven in part by the Mexican Revolution.
When you start looking at those numbers separately and then you put them together, we start seeing that a lot of these communities are living in the same areas. And so at some point, they started intermarrying.
In 1916, the first Punjabi Mexican marriage was recorded, and it was the first of many.
Both communities were considered non-white and non-American, so their marriages weren't a violation of laws that prohibited marriages between white people and people of color at the time.
That's why in Yuba City, you started seeing things like roti quesadillas and curry with Spanish rice.
And so that, I think, was one of the big things, was location, also the receptiveness of immigrants in comparison to other states, and the history of immigration to California.
Today, Latin American and AAPI migrants make up the majority of California's foreign-born population.
Of the 10.6 million registered in 2023, 48.3% were from Latin America, and 35.6% were Asian, Native Hawaiian, or Pacific Islander.
And it helps explain how Seiko's parents met.
My mom and my dad met like at a bar or something, and then like here or whatever. I think it was like somewhere in Alhambra or whatever, since like the Asian population there is like growing, and there was like a really like big Mexican population as well.
The last thing I wanted to explore in this video was how AAPI Latinos were navigating their cultures as adults. Did they feel more connected to one side of their lineage than another growing up? And were they trying to change that now that they were adults?
Well, I work for a Japanese company, Japanese mortuary, so I kind of in tune with that. But then, obviously I'm always in touch with my Hispanic side. My dad has a bunch of uncles. We have a huge Mexican side, so, and obviously the food's a big thing for the culture.
My upbringing, I'll say, is more Dominican than anything else. Pero you do see the blend of the Japanese and the Dominican. For example, the whole thing about taking your shoes off at home, like that's super big for us. The way we say goodnight, like even with my mom is Dominican, pero before we go to bed, even now, like till today, yo le digo oyasumi, that's good night in Japanese.
That's in part because Chinito's grandma is Japanese dominant.
She speaks fluent Spanish, but Japanese is her first language.
It's adorable because you see how like Asians have that thing where like they can't pronounce certain letters. Por ejemplo, instead of hola, it's like ora. Instead of, So it's funny with her because not only does she say it, but she like texts that way too.
Chinito is talking about a picture of a bag of flour his grandma sent him. In Spanish, flour is harina.
He sent me a picture of it. She got Alina written on it. When Corona happened, she was texting me. She's like, mijo, por favor, cuídate del coronavirus. And she texts, like, one thing is saying it, but like she texts it straight like that. It's like, yeah, it's cute.
It shaped one of Chinito's goals for the future. Chinito is a successful viral chef in Florida now, along with his dad, El Ninja. He's also a musician who goes by the name Chinito 2800, who's traveled to Japan for shows.
Bienvenida mami, tú eres kawaii, Tokio Shibuya, estuve aquí desde chamaquito. Conozco las calles que no están en ningún mapa, pero no conozco nadie que sea más guapa.
And I was able to connect with a whole bunch of Japanese artists, I did shows, I did everything. And I feel like I wasn't able to fully take advantage of the situation because of the language barrier. Like there was places like a bar perhaps that I tried to go to and they're like, oh, only Japanese people. And I was like, oh, but I'm Japanese. I was born in Japan. And he was like, you Japanese, but you don't speak Japanese? I was like, oh, damn.
Because of that, Chinito wants to learn Japanese.
I want to get to that point. I want to be able to surprise my grandmother and have a full-on conversation with her in Japanese. And she's like, whoa, like where did this come from, you know?
In the meantime, he's connecting to his Japanese roots through a restaurant he and his dad operate.
We take Japanese food and blend it with the Dominican culture, with Caribbean culture. We make sushi for people who don't really eat sushi. You feel me? Sushi with nothing raw, sushi with chicken, with shrimp, with steak, con un plátano maduro por encima. Tenemos sushi que tiene chicharrón, sushi que tiene ropa vieja, sushi que empanizado en Doritos.
If population demographics keep going the way they've been going, we're gonna see more people like Russell, Seiko, Tyla, and Chinito.
Between 2010 and 2010 alone, the share of people who consider themselves multiracial in the United States increased by 276%.
It's a trend the co-author of the UCLA Data Brief is very familiar with, in part because he is part of the trend.
So I consider myself Mexilancan. It's a mix of Mexican and Sri Lankan. My parents are immigrants. My mom is from Mexico. My dad is from Sri Lanka. They immigrated here around the 80s.
AKA, yes, he himself is an AAPI Latino.
They made it work. I think they had language differences, right? Where my dad speaks Sinhalese and English, my mom Spanish and English, and somehow they made it work. I think we're seeing an understanding of how we can question what like Latinidad looks like, right? That there's no one box way of understanding what our identities look like. And so it's nice to see that AAPI Latinos are entering this conversation where we are challenging what it means to be Latino.
And the challenge part of it is real. AAPI Latinos have made Chinito himself do double takes.
It's a mind fuck, I'll say. The other day it happened to me where there was this Japanese girl that went to the restaurant and everybody was taking a picture, and it was two Japanese girls, it was a Spanish girl. I was there, we posing for the picture, and then I guess the photographer wasn't doing something right. And I heard somebody in Spanish say, oh no, it's not like that, it's like this. I'm like, wait a minute. The Spanish girl is behind me. And I was like, Japanese girl over here speaking Spanish? I was like, yo, what's going on? And then it clicked. I'm like, that the same way that I was just like, what the hell? That's how people react to me.
Are you an AAPI Latino? Which culture do you relate to the most? Let me know in the comments. If you like this video, you might also enjoy this other video. Thank you for watching.